Are you good at looking after yourself, or do you know that definition of care? Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about that. So, welcome back to the Crack the Code podcast. I'm super excited to be here today with Wendi Bergin. She's a regular mom with a husband, a bunch of kids who she homeschools, some dogs, the founder of Joyfully Prepared, and the host of the Joyfully Prepared podcast. She's dedicated to teaching busy moms skills like gardening, food preservation, natural remedies, and more, so they can take care of themselves and their families through developing talents with confidence while saving money. So, welcome, Wendi.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you too. But I first of all want to know, and probably the listeners want to know, how many kids do you have?
We have 7 children.
Wow, that's a houseful
It's a
and a
household.
handful. And homeschooling.
Yeah.
Good on you for doing that.
Well,
That's
thank you.
amazing. Awesome. And so tell me a little bit about how you got into this whole preparedness stuff, because I think a lot of people, especially since COVID even, are
Mhm.
really looking more at being more self-contained and being able to look after themselves. And you were kind of ahead of the curve, I think. So what got you started down that road?
Well, thank you for asking. My grandparents got me started back before I was ever even a twinkle in their eye. I have my grandma and grandpa Snow lived in Charlottesville, Virginia. That's where I grew up. And they got married, and soon after, their church leaders told them that they needed to put up, it was 1938, they told them they needed to put up 2 year supply of food and supplies, things to keep them going, whether in business or in life. And so they decided to take that counsel. And my grandpa, he was a landscaper. Back then, they called him a nurseryman, something like that. And he decided, okay, I'm going to do this. So he put up 2 year supply of chains and tires, anything equipment that he needed to stay in business.
Mm.
And then at home, he and my grandma and my great grandmother, his mother, they grew big gardens back then, and they started canning food and put it, and he says in his journal that they put up 1,800 jars of food.
Whoa.
I know it's like way more than I've ever done.
Where
And
would you put all that?
I know, well, that too, and I don't know over how long that was, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? But I think about, holy cow, like, they didn't even have air conditioning
Yeah.
back then, you know? "Oh, I have to have air conditioning when I can." So, as everything kind of progressed, and I'm sure this happened over a few years, but in 1941, as we know, in the United States, we were bombed by Japan in, Hawaii, and the United States entered World War II. And at that point, all of our resources and time, our men went overseas, the food, everything went to support the war, which means that the regular folk, the civilians, I wasn't alive, but they had to, they were given ration stamps. And so they could go and use these ration stamps. And I don't know if it was every day or every week, but they could go stand in line and get their little bit of cheese and bread and milk, things like that. And that's how much of the United States population survived. Well, Grandpa records in his journal that because of the food and the effort that they put in before this happened, that they never had to use one of their ration stamps, and Grandpa stayed in business, whereas his competitors did not. And so that's where my story starts. And my mother's side of the family are just as prepared and self-reliant in a different way, but that I really get it from my grandparents, who passed it to my parents, who chose to continue with that way of life. And now I teach preparedness skills, and I absolutely am really kind of obsessed with it.
Yeah. And I mean, it's amazing because, and especially in this day and age, people are not generally prepared for anything. It's a really as you go kind of mentality. And, most of us are lucky if we're prepared for a week's worth of groceries, never
Right,
mind a year's or 2 years worth of groceries. So that's
right.
a really great thing to be aware of. We don't like to wait for things anymore. So,
No, no, you're
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
We want it right now.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit. We were going to talk about some care principles that you have.
Mhm.
So let's talk a little bit about that.
Okay. So my kind of foundation of self-reliance, yeah, it's having the skills and the know-how, but ultimately there are three principles of self-reliance. The first principle is self-care. The second principle is caring for your loved ones, your immediate family and those you love. And then the third principle is going out and serving and caring for your community. That's the foundation. Those are the foundational principles that everything about self-reliance really builds on.
Yeah. And what's your some ideas for self-care? What kind of things do you count as self-care?
So, I'm still in this journey of self-care myself,
Mm,
because especially as women, I don't think we're very good at, as mothers, we put everybody before ourselves. And because we think it's less selfish to do that. And self-care is not selfishness. And self-care can be a massage. I have one booked for tomorrow.
mhm.
It can be a pedicure, a manicure, a spa day. It can be those things. But what I'm learning as I'm developing my personal self-reliance is that self-care really is doing things that bring you joy. And my business is called Joyfully Prepared. And a lot of women really want to learn preparedness, self-reliance skills. They want to learn how to bake bread. They want to learn how to can. I want to learn how to grow a garden. All these different things, and like I said, I do teach some natural remedies too. And a lot of people are becoming disenchanted with, the pharmaceutical industry, and they want to go back kind of to nature. And so they're so anxious and so wanting to learn these things. And as we do that, as we start to create, that really is what self-care is a
Mm,
creation. And so when you learn something that you want to learn, if you want to learn how to paint or you want to learn how to fish, it doesn't have to be necessarily a revolving around self-reliance. It's the act of loving yourself enough to give yourself the opportunity to learn something that you want to learn.
yeah. And I think with the self-care too, I know for myself is like if I don't do something for myself at the end of the day, I kind of feel ripped off.
I
Like,
agree.
if and
Mhm.
even if you just start your day with something that you like to do for yourself, whether it's read a book or whatever you want to do, take a few minutes to get your head together for the day. It
Right.
just makes the day go better and you just feel better because you filled yourself up a little bit first.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. I hadn't really considered that as self-care, but it really is. In fact, it was funny because yesterday I was reading a book and it was just a little. I love historical
Mm,
romances,
mm,
very
mm.
clean.
Yeah.
I'm a
Yeah.
clean girl,
Yeah. Mm,
and I had kind of put myself in my bedroom because I have a lot of activity on the outside of my bedroom,
yeah.
and so I was in there just reading my story, just laying down, reading my story, and then the people started coming in.
Yeah.
They want to start talking about this, and I need that, and la la la. And all the people that I married and I made, they came in, and I thought, I'm just in my room.
Yeah.
This is my sanctuary.
Yeah.
And so I kind of had to scoosh them out because I need that moment. I don't read a book every day like that. Yeah, I do other things to care for myself, but in
Mhm.
that moment, I just wanted to be alone with quiet, just enjoying somebody else's work of art, quite frankly.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe you'll have to put a sign on the door,
I think
mom's
so.
quiet time, do not disturb.
I might have to.
So the second thing you had on your list was, care for loved ones. Tell us some more
Yeah.
about that.
So the idea is the concept is that as you've cared for yourself, and we've heard the cliche um, idea of, you have to fill your bucket before you can give to other people. And I
Mhm.
completely agree with that. And so by being able to take care of yourself, whether you need silence, quiet, whatever, or you need to read a book, or you need to go on a walk, however you're caring for your body and spirit, that fills you up. And then you have the capacity to care for those who you love the very most. And they see you caring for yourself. And this is where I'm working on my personal journey. And hopefully, especially my daughters, grow up and get married and have children, hopefully I've changed enough in my motherhood that they'll have a step higher, a step up from what I've done. And so I can now serve them. I have the capacity, the wherewithal, the energy, and fortitude, whatever it needs,
Yeah.
because with a whole bunch of kids,
Uh-huh.
I don't know about your boys, but they always seem to show up right about 10 o'clock at night with the most pressing thing on their mind. And I'm like, oh, I gotta go to
Yeah.
bed. But the fact that they want to come talk to me is more important to me than, I mean, you know what I'm saying? It doesn't
Yeah.
happen every night.
Yeah.
And so if I've eaten well, or I've taken care of myself during the day or during the week, and this child needs me, I'm more able, have the bigger capacity to serve that child, to love on him or her as they need. And the same goes for my husband, making sure that um, we have very traditional roles in our family, and so I take care of the house. He's very helpful, but like I washed the sheets and made the bed yesterday, and that's a service to myself, but it's also a service to my husband, making sure that his clothes are clean or that there's soap in the shower. That's I enjoy taking care of those things, and because I'm also taking care of myself, it doesn't become a place of resentment, like, oh, he doesn't even
Mhm.
realize that I da da da.
Mhm.
No, it doesn't need to be that, because he does wonderful things for me all the time. And so as I'm able to take care of myself, I have a bigger capacity to be able to take care of those that I love the very most.
Yeah. And like you say, it's so important. And I think things are shifting. I think the next generation is going to be a little better than our
I
generation
think so.
with the women of looking, finding that time for yourself. It
Right.
might, granted, it would be hard in a house with 7 kids and dogs and everything else. A little bit more
Yeah.
tricky.
There's a few balls in the air.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And then that takes us on to caring for the community. So
Yeah.
give us some tips there.
So again, so you start with, you have your foundational principle of self-care. You've taken care of yourself. And let me say this too. There are going to be days when the self-care does take a back seat. I've had some tragedy in my family, and those days my self-care didn't rise to the top. It wasn't the big, but once we got over the big hump of the tragedy, and I was still trying to, it was a family member, and I was still trying to serve this family member, but she needed just to be still. And it was in that moment that I realized I need to go back and take care of myself.
Mhm.
And so I went back and I'm like, okay, so we got over the hump, the initial hump of the tragedy, and I poured everything into this child, which I wanted to and was grateful I could. But then once things settled for, a bit, then I could go back and take care of myself. So understand, it's not always like it just works like this, like a little stair
Mhm.
step. It's
Yeah.
not perfect. And in fact, I call myself the hot mess mama at this
Yeah.
point, because most of the time it's just a hot mess, but I'm getting things done. So to go to the community, there's a quote that I don't quote very well, but it sounds something like this. You cannot feed the hungry from an empty shelf. You
Mhm.
cannot financially support someone from an empty purse. You cannot emotionally support someone if you yourself are not emotionally solid. And you can't counsel people and teach if you're not learned. And so that's really what the whole principle of self-reliance is about, is that you're doing all these things in self-care, learning, growing, taking care of yourself, your family, and then you have the ability to go out and care for your community. I lived in New Jersey up until just a little while ago, and I was there when 9/11 happened.
Mhm.
And my family was fine. And I got word that one of the ladies' husbands, who was in my church congregation, that he worked in one of the towers. And they didn't know if he had gotten out or not.
Mhm.
And it was upsetting to me for sure. But everything in my house, other than the tragedy of it and the shock, everybody was safe. And I had the ability, because I do keep, one of the things I teach is food storage. So I keep like a little home store.
Yeah.
And so I didn't have to go to the grocery store. I could just go get food, and I made her a meal, and I had brownie mix. So I made her brownies,
Mhm.
and I just took it over to her house. And I wasn't there to, she had other friends there, in other words, who were closer to her, who could care for her emotionally,
Right.
but I brought the food.
Yeah.
And while I was there, she got a phone call that her husband was safe.
Oh, good.
But she called me, I don't remember when it was, a few weeks after it, maybe it was longer, and she expressed such gratitude for my willingness to bring food over, that she didn't have to worry about feeding her kids, and that it was just there, and that there were brownies, and that really meant
Mhm.
a lot to her, that there were brownies.
Yeah.
So when we have food in our home that we know how to fix, we can care for people. Being able to financially help and to donate to charities or to people that we need, or even our own family. All these ways are a community service. I have a couple friends right now who are going through a couple of difficult things. And because of my study and learning, I have been able to counsel them on how to, work through some of the issues that they've had. So it goes in so many different ways. You can be that big charity person who puts on blood drives, or does this or does that, or it can be a simple thing as taking a meal to someone, or just being there to hold somebody's hand, to mourn with them as they're processing, whether it be a death or another situation, or just their own realization of their own worth, being able to help people understand that they are worth every bit of our attention. But it all starts with that self-care.
Yeah, and I love that. I love how, like you said, it's not necessarily the big things to help out.
Mm-mm.
It's often the small things and
Right.
just being there for somebody. I mean,
Yes.
that's such a small thing. That's a huge thing
It
because
is.
oftentimes we don't know what to do for people, and sometimes that's as simple as it can be.
Yeah, I agree with you. Just sitting with someone, sometimes they don't even need to talk, and you don't need to talk. You can just
Mm,
sit there, and
yeah.
and sometimes people just need companionship. And like you referred to, the COVID back, when we locked down, there was so much of that lost, where we could just go sit with people.
Mhm.
And now that things are a little bit more, I guess free is the right word, that we can return to those relationships, and we can go sit. You don't have to hug and smush all over people,
Yeah.
but you can just sit with them and visit, and let them know that they are very important in this world. And and I really am very passionate about the idea that we don't, as a generation, or as whatever's going on in our culture, that we're in, so, and I know you help with this a lot, that we have so much pain, and that pain often looks like depression, it looks like anger, pride, whatever it is, but really it's pain. And if we're able to give grace and love and sit with people who are maybe a little not fun, prickly to be around,
Mhm.
that we may not help solve anything, because they have to come to that conclusion on their own, but at least we can be a soft place for them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so important. Love that. So, Wendy, if people want to get in touch with you and learn more about what you do, what's the best way for them to do that? Of course, all of everything will be in the show notes, but just so we have it here.
Thank you. I have a website called joyfullyprepared.com, so that's easy.
Yeah.
I have a podcast called Joyfully Prepared. I'd love for you to listen.
Mhm.
And I have a free Facebook group called Joyfully Prepared. So just go to
Awesome.
the search bar and type in Joyfully Prepared. It's a free Facebook group where we have a bunch of people, lovely community, and we're constantly helping each other, trying to work through preparedness ideas, organization. I need to can this, or whatever it is. And so it's a really, really nice community of really good people.
That's awesome. And before we let you go, you had mentioned quickly something about doing natural remedies. So I'd be curious to know what's one of your favorite natural remedies that maybe people wouldn't have thought about.
Poultices, actually.
Oh.
I like to make poultices, and so a poultice is kind of like we've heard maybe you've read books or heard of mustard plasters
Mhm.
back in the day.
Yeah.
So that's a poultice really, and so one of my favorite ones is to make is an onion poultice, and for if you have any kind of chest congestion, bronchitis, anything like that, and, it's just cook up some onions, and you put some vinegar in it and some corn flour, cornmeal kind of to absorb all the liquid, and you put it on a piece of cotton, wrap it up like a burrito and set it on your chest and breathe, and it just
Mm.
works miracles. But you can use poultice. That's just one type
Yeah.
of poultice, but I think
Yeah.
poultices need to be used more often, quite frankly.
Yeah, that's interesting and
Mhm.
probably unexpected for most people to hear about.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
reach out to Wendy if you want to learn more about natural remedies and how
Thank
to
you.
make poultices. I think that's really cool.
Thank
And
you.
hopefully everybody learned something new today and just know, it's important to look after yourself, to do your self-care so that you can care for others. If you aren't doing any preparedness stuff, go ahead, try something out. I know during lockdown, everyone was making bread. A lot of people are getting into the growing gardens and doing some canning. So just know that it's never too late to get started with any of this.